used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks,
So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
Sort of, this is a fraud because, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. I started hearing about these tokens. And they're like, hey, selling courses, like, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like, they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became I'm blanking on the name right now. But
A1Z? What is that?
No. I'm sorry. I'm blanking on. It's this famous. I'm going to remember it right after I get out of here. It's one of the famous handle now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep. It's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look.
On and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that he felt like he could
store your money somewhere else. How do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me, I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos. It's wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take might be one of the first trillionaires or whatever. Like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys or
Whiz Kid, who you listen to him talk. He has an answer for everything. He's so articulate. He's so knowledgeable. Like, I listened to previous interviews before he got busted.
So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent. Get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, he was the most notorious and well-respected. Like, they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX.
Wow.
Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance, or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? You're setting it up with I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with colloidal silver. Okay, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. Found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it, but it's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your. Most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, information about that. He says, hey, we're actually can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this fancy language for a way to anonymize your transaction. You put it, I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money
So
there.
is the lure is how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
This thing. So all this money's going in, and then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time, gay, so can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it?
No, basically they were we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Myself, they kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers And we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the token. I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like, they had hidden all their numbers. Like, Sam had FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
Your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, you know, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party. Ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it.
Right.
It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was a person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, you know, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems.
But
the son of Harvard lawyers, we just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was So I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was like just me discovering like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what? Around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar, right? It's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum? They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go, right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you went what they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, well, you know, there was fungibility between wallets. TT. So it looks like, if you just look at their assets, it looks like they're covering their liabilities. They owe customers $10 billion. It looks like they have $10 billion. But like,
do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is one of the... This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. Senator's office reached out to me. They're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to, this is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, y'all. So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his, you can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by Cia. That these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically, it's almost impossible to trace. And it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill like was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly like, some crypto is, sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So like look at the Turkish lira. After the fact, he's like he's still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Coinbase, it seems like they're, you know, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like companies, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, you know, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage to, like, if you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. Their executives, Ryan Salami or something, I think that's his last name. Salami, I don't know, I just don't know how to pronounce it, but he was like, yeah, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. Sam launches FTX in 2019. And that's a crypto platform where, honestly, you can make a lot more money than just with a trading firm. So FTX quickly skyrockets in popularity. This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you you're like, it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it. And so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go. You put your fiat. The money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to, I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, you know, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification for to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here, here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all, where's the money? I don't know. But he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like you put the...
I don't really understand what's going... Like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one. Because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all...
Somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that like there's nothing here. But the problem is that with the lawyers, then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of like built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader. A lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the like most fair case you could make about don't invest. Like that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few
Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his?
The person's not named in the report who was donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami, but. That person eventually, what are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then in like investment funds, they invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. So he called it Fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled.
Like what exactly? Like what are the regulations in terms of like what you're allowed to do and donate, and how did he violate them?
So I think the big violation was you're not supposed to.
It was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that. What is it's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto, and that's ultimately what he was doing, but it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like
chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. I mean, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane, but so they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money. You can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games and that's why I lost the money.
But I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like, one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to do the dark, where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable, and then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX...
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese. They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTX, he cleaned up on all his own customers, just basically taking their money, like, oh, I know exactly when to fold, I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out. The problem is, when the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral.
Analogy for losing your house?
What's funny? Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say I touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. It's almost like a bank. Like, you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. Not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. They're good people. A lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. Make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said, like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda, they said they had this backdoor this stuff, and you start to have repeat occurrences. Like, I just cover stuff all the time, and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago, I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at, and he said, it wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after, like, the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over. Wow. Like, very strange. And these offshore entities were also using, like, U.S. branches. Like, there's FTX U.S., which was, like, more regulated, but not really that regulated. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader. Yeah, Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that
and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this an...
I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick.
So the fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse, this $40 billion penthouse, the things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish...
Guy who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other, people, or it's just like...
Well, how does he skate on that? Like, how...
FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
Actually, campaign finance laws, I've heard, are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate. There's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews.
Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who comes, he's the son of two Harvard lawyers.
And then when you have him on, there's a lot of, I wasn't aware, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that, I don't know. There was all this hemming
and she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't gonna fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery.
Each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. Like, it sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Like, Sam was just hopped up on amphetamines. What is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam? He'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal, basically screaming about, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten.
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16 give you this yield. He starts explaining like this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme. And so ultimately, Matt Levine's like, yeah, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stopped short. And so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. Just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars. And so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch of time, but FTX was sort of the worst offender. Is let's say I give you a loan, Joe. So an unsecured loan would be, I give you $1 million and I don't ask for anything.
Easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. Hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some, third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that I really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing. Sort of like just like hey, you're gonna get rich. So I was always getting invited to these get rich seminars, and it just was kind of. I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to even before that, I had done a show where I was trying to break down these topics. I was like,
regulators, when he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like, what could they have possibly done to make it easy?
Regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
This big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like, I forgot. It's so silly. It's you find actually his whole technique of shifting the blame onto Alameda and I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. This stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil or any.
Gotten away with it.
So many of these scams are these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources. You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cap. We don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. There's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went?
There were things that were coming out, like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. Kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did. But but I start doing that, and after I cover get rich quick schemes for a while, you have Dogecoin, you have SafeMoon, you have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange. FTX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like it was very opaque. It's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's
with regulators. They were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this like battle between them. And ultimately teased for a while. But like, so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers. And I wanted somebody to say,
figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already, I mean, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before, now I can just send you 100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they like to get paid.
Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong to everything. I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. Sam goes, oh, you won, like, our battle. And people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers, right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time.
It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore accounts and stuff.